Good morning. You ready for an air safety forum? We got a good one for you. So let's get started. We have a lot to talk about. Our first panel this morning deals with cargo safety. And remember, all airline pilots are cargo pilots. Sometimes the cargo is above the main deck, sometimes it's below. But these are issues that can affect us all. So I'd like to turn the stage over now to my fellow chairman, Captain Rich Hughey. Rich chairs the ALPA's President Committee for Cargo. And for those of you in the room not familiar with ALPA's structure, that means our association has designated Rich and his committee as the focal point for issues unique to or prevalent in the all-cargo airline industry. I've been getting up every morning, swimming laps in the hotel pool, and I've also noticed that Rich has been swimming in that same pool. He knows a lot about cargo, but he's also one heck of a swimmer. Rich, get us started.
Thank you, Chuck, and good morning to everyone, both here in the audience and those of us watching online. The opening panel of the 61st Air Safety Forum is Cargo Safety Performance in Risk Areas. The purpose of this panel is to begin the discussion on how we keep America flying as viewed through the lens of Part 121, all cargo operators. I will cover a few slides to capture safety performance and then hand it over to our outstanding panel, and they will cover and share their expertise on some very relevant risk areas. Following the discussion on stage, we'll look to you, the audience, for questions that you may have for the panel and its topics. That's our setup. Let's transition. I want each of you to think about performance, what that means through your own experiences. My experience takes me back to a great coach, Richard Quick, the John Wooden, the Vince Lombardi of swimming, coach of 6 Olympic teams with athletes earning over 100 U.S. Olympic medals, while also coaching college athletes to 13 NCAA team championships. He was one of the greatest coaches in all of sport. Coach Quick once said, "Excellence is excellence, no matter where it occurs." We know it when we see it, whether it be in athletics, in the arts, in science, in our military, or in business. We're drawn to the people, the teams, the organizations who in demanding and complex environments perform. They simply show us what is possible. He finished with, "The smartest thing we can do is learn from the excellence we observe in others." Right now, in Part 121, we observe safety performance excellence in passenger operations. It hasn't always been that way, and it was out of major accidents in the 1990s that our industry began to re-examine and assess how we measure performance. Our industry sought to adopt a new safety strategy, a data-driven, integrated strategy to reduce fatality risks in commercial aircraft. We know the outcome. It was the formation of the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, or CAST, who identifies safety areas through analysis of accident and incident data to implement interventions and safety enhancements. So with that, if we do a 20-year look back on a simple metric of performance, major accidents, we can learn something. We see that between 1994 and 2003, passenger operators had 13 major accidents where there was either fatalities or an aircraft destroyed or both. In that same time, cargo operators had 6 fatal accidents and were in parity at 11 hull losses. It was accidents like TWA 800 and ValueJet 592 that spurred our industry to find ways to perform better. After CAST was established, we see in the next 10-year increment, from 2004 to 2013, a significant improvement in passenger operations, with the last accident being 6 years ago in 2009 with Colgan Air. The safety performance improvement in passenger operations is an example of excellence. For cargo operators in that same period, there was an increase in fatal major accidents, with 7 and 11 where the aircraft was destroyed. While these bar graphs comparing passenger and cargo are important to understand, they don't capture the full disparity of safety performance, because passenger and cargo operators have very different slices of the Part 121 pie. According to the Department of Transportation, cargo encompasses only a 7% slice of the Part 121 pie as measured by aircraft departures. While U.S. cargo operators perform much better than most aviation categories across the globe, Part 121 major accident rate is significantly higher in cargo than it is with passenger. Similar to the questions that our industry sought to answer in the late 1990s in order to improve performance, we now seek those same answers today on cargo safety performance. Why? We fly the same aircraft. Passenger and cargo pilots are both human. There has been no gene therapy for cargo pilots in order to fly better at night. We have the same Part 121 experience and training requirements. We share the same aviation infrastructure. It's why ALPA believes in one level of safety. Even with so much in common, do passenger and cargo share the same risks? That is one of the questions we want to begin to answer with this panel. These are the risk areas and the topics our distinguished panel will discuss with you today. Please join me in welcoming our panel, starting from my left. Mr. Doug Ferguson, Boeing's expert on aircraft fire protection systems. Next to Doug is First Officer Scott Reeves of FedEx Express and manager of flight safety for FedEx Express. Next to Scott is the Honorable Robert Sumwalt, board member, National Transportation Safety Board. And rounding out the panel, our own Chuck Hogeman of United Airlines and our Aviation Safety Chair for ALPA. Let's transition again. Our first panelist this morning, Mr. Doug Ferguson from the Boeing Corporation. Doug, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you for inviting me to be here, and good morning, everybody. I was originally asked to explain Boeing's position for an ICC AIA working paper, and now I think I'm in the position of explaining Boeing's multi-operator memorandum that just came out recently. So the significant question is, what has happened now that has caused us to provide this guidance to the operators regarding the carriage of lithium batteries? And briefly, it's a recognition that unrestricted quantities of lithium batteries that are involved in a cargo fire, even with Halon 1301 cargo fire suppression system, could still create hazards that would affect the continued safe flight and landing of the aircraft, particularly depending on the location, the type and quantity of batteries, and the time required for a safe landing. To try and explain that a little bit more, I'd like to go briefly through a timeline of what's been happening over the last couple of years, and that might provide a little bit of insight as to how we got here, and in the process explain a little bit about the fire suppression capabilities on the aircraft and the hazards and threats posed by lithium batteries. There have been some accident investigations, and they've heightened the concern about lithium batteries and the potential for contributing to or causing an in-flight fire. In particular, the UPS DC-8 in Philadelphia in 2006, the UPS 747-400 freighter at Dubai in 2010, and the Asiana 747-400 freighter over the Pacific Ocean in 2011. As a result of that heightened concern, Boeing formed a lithium battery working council in 2012 to identify and communicate the Boeing position regarding the carriage of lithium batteries. And that council is comprised of individuals from our flight operations group, the pilots, payloads, environmental control systems, the fire marshal's office, and structures. So there's a large organization behind me who's also been working on this. So that group prepared material for internal and external education, and there are several PowerPoint slides that are presentation packages that are available at various locations on the internet. Some of that material has been presented to different forums. In preparing that material, we did a review of the existing data and identified that approximately 100 18650 batteries, those are the the small, about the size of a AA battery, lithium-ion rechargeable battery, created a heat release rate and temperatures that are similar to the 5-minute oil burner test requirement for Class C cargo liners. So that's what we certify our cargo liners in a Class C compartment for, and many other materials. So that's a box about this big. Following that, we released a multi-operator memorandum in 2012 that supported the recommendations that had already been made by the FAA in I forget what, a safety alert for operators, a SAFO, for transporting lithium batteries. At the time, we recognized and tried to communicate that an overall solution to reduce this risk would actually take an industry forum of aircraft manufacturers, pilots, airline operators, ULD manufacturers, battery manufacturers, regulatory authorities, and many other interested groups. Following that, we did some research and development to better understand the characteristics of lithium batteries, in particular the temperatures, the pressure pulses, and the overall heat release rate for both lithium-ion and lithium metal batteries. There has been a lot of other research also done in that direction, and in that intervening time, the industry as a whole has learned a lot. In particular, there was additional testing that we were able to support the FAA Tech Center with, involving full-scale testing of a cargo of lithium batteries, 5,000 lithium-ion batteries in a cargo compartment on a 727. And during that testing, there was an indication that, yes, halon suppressed the flames, but it was not able to stop the propagation of the thermal heat from one battery affecting adjacent batteries. So there was a thermal runaway in each battery that kept progressing throughout the packages. At the end of an hour, there was a little notice of an increasing temperature rise, but at the time, it was identified that there was certain effectiveness for halon, and that provided an acceptable level of protection. There were still ongoing concerns. And they also did some testing for lithium metal batteries with 5,000 batteries. That test was stopped early due to an increasing halon leakage rate, and also due to increasing temperatures in the compartment and outside the compartment that were threatening the structure. After stopping that testing and applying some suppression and extinguishing techniques while checking to see what the status was, an explosion or overpressure event happened, and some of those pictures are available on the web too. Additional testing that was conducted involved fire-resistant containers, in particular some containers that had shown good capability for protecting and suppressing a fire of normal combustibles. There was a desire to use that same type of container for lithium batteries, and so some testing was done with the lithium-ion batteries. Some were successful, but during some other testing, it was identified that over a period of time, you could have a release of flammable vapors that could be ignited, and you could have a rapid overpressure event, usually referred to as an explosion. And some of that testing was followed on. More development was done with a fire suppression agent that wasn't halon 1301. And again, in one condition, there was an overpressure event, which raised the question, what's actually going on there? There was an indication that that kind of vapor should not have been capable of igniting and causing an explosion. So the Tech Center did some additional testing. Other areas of industry in the battery industry and in academia looked at what was, not because of that, but had been looking at the gases that were developed. And so there was a lot of information that was generated out of that. In the meantime, there's been a commercial aviation safety team, Safety Enhancement 126, that's looking at the mitigation of hazards related to the carriage of dangerous cargo, with a particular emphasis on carrying lithium batteries. Airbus and Boeing, the regulators, ALPA, IPA. There are many people and many different organizations that are represented in that CAST activity. It's been going on for about 2 years now. The first phase was looking at the causal factors, focused on those 3 accidents, and identifying what the gaps were. And right now the activity is focused towards development of solutions. That phase is expected to be completed by the end of this year. There was a request from ICAO that more information be gathered regarding lithium batteries. So in 2014, they requested a multidisciplinary meeting, one that went across the different pieces of ICAO. And they invited members, cargo fire specialists from the airframe manufacturers to attend so that they could get better insight into what's really going on an aircraft. So there were 2 meetings in 2014, and there will be another meeting again next week up in Montreal. At the second meeting, there were actually about 14 recommendations that were identified that looked all the way from the battery level to the packaging level to the operations to regulatory nature and to potential changes at the aircraft level. One of those recommendations included a desire to look at packaging for the batteries that was performance-based, so that there was an increased level of safety in carrying those batteries because they were in packages that were designed to address and mitigate the threats. Part of that activity was presented to the Dangerous Goods panel at ICAO, and that's one of the reasons, the primary reason for the meeting coming up is to look at what would be an appropriate performance-based packaging standard and to bring that back to the Dangerous Goods panel for consideration for inclusion into the technical instructions for carrying dangerous goods. So with that said, what are the real concerns? It's important to know that the fire protection capabilities and the certification of our aircraft and our systems were developed considering the carriage of general cargo and not the unique hazards that are associated with dangerous goods, including lithium batteries. What has happened is that the testing has shown that there are higher rates of smoke production, flammable vapor, pressures, and temperatures that occur with fires that involve lithium metal batteries, lithium ion batteries, lithium polymer batteries than with ordinary Class A type combustibles, normal paper products, for instance. Halon has a limited effectiveness and depressurization that would be available on a freighter has limited effectiveness in dealing with a battery involving lithium fire involving lithium batteries. It can prevent the ignition of the flammable vapors, and it can prevent the other combustibles from getting involved in the fire. So it slows down the rate of that thermal propagation from batteries in one package to the other packages. But it doesn't cool anything down, so that thermal propagation still continues. It just doesn't happen as quickly as it would if the environment was unsuppressed. So with that growing body of test data, there's been a growing body of test data from the FAA Tech Center and others that has identified that the existing cargo compartment fire suppression system, as certified to the current requirements, are unable to suppress or extinguish a fire involving significant quantities of lithium batteries. And this results in a reduced time available for safe flight and landing of an aircraft to a diversion airport. Some of the other considerations are that there's a large quantity of gas that's released during this thermal runaway process within an individual battery, and as you get more batteries involved, you release more gas. So that generation of gas in the compartment that you are also adding halon into or depressurizing, that gas pushes out the halon, and you, depending on how many batteries you get involved, you can reach the point where the gas pushes the halon out at a faster rate than expected, and so you are reducing the halon concentration. You're effectively, it creates a situation effectively increasing the leakage rate of the halon. And so you reach a point where even with normal combustibles, perhaps that compartment isn't inert anymore. And it's compounded by the fact that with the additional information now available regarding the gases that make up what's being released from the batteries, it's a more flammable mixture. There's a percentage of hydrogen that's generated during this thermal runaway process and the release of the vapors. And the hydrogen is much easier to ignite than most other hydrocarbons. That concern about igniting those unburned hydrocarbons is well illustrated by some of the testing that's been done at the FAA Technical Center. In addition to driving out the halon, it also, those increased temperatures and pressures drive out the smoke. And so there's a possibility over a period of time that the smoke penetration being generated at a higher rate and being pushed out at a faster rate, where it can overcome the features that have been designed into the airplane to keep smoke from penetrating into occupied compartments, both for passenger, in the passenger area and in the flight deck. So with all of those concerns, and with the history of some accidents that at least involved lithium batteries as part of the fire, ICC AIA, with, again, representation by Airbus and Boeing, Embraer, and Bombardier, put together a working paper to present to the Dangerous Goods panel outlining those concerns and information, and used the safety management system that ICAO uses, which is DOC 9859. So applying that knowledge and knowing that an uncontrolled fire can be hazardous or catastrophic, that safety process requires immediate action because it's an unacceptable risk under the existing circumstances. The summary, the result of that analysis is in an appendix of the ICC AIA working paper to the Dangerous Goods panel that was presented in the fall of 2014. And we had 3 recommendations. First off, given that there are known and unknown risks involving lithium metal and lithium ion batteries, ICC AIA recommended that appropriate packaging and shipping requirements be established to safely ship lithium ion batteries as cargo on aircraft. ICC AIA, by the way, that's the International Coordinating Council of Aircraft Industries Association, recommended that high-density packages of lithium-ion batteries and cells, such as defined by UN 3480, not be transported as cargo on passenger aircraft until such time as safer methods of transport are established and followed. ICC AIA further recommended that appropriate packaging and shipping requirements are established to more safely ship lithium metal and lithium-ion batteries as cargo on freighter aircraft. So following that discussion and the presentation of that working paper to ICAO, Boeing has gone forward with providing guidance to the operators in a new multi-operator memorandum that I know at least some of you are aware of, where we provided very clear guidance that we agree with the recommendations in the ICC AIA working paper, and that we recommend operators not carry lithium-ion batteries as cargo on passenger aircraft until such time as safer methods of packaging are developed and implemented. We also recommended that operators who choose, whether they're passenger operators or freighter operators, who choose to carry lithium-ion batteries or lithium metal batteries, conduct a safety assessment, looking at what they're carrying and what those hazards are, and what mitigation methods they may have in place, and what their operations actually, what that risk is to their operations and their aircraft fleet. So I'll very quickly step through this. That should consider the types and quantities of lithium batteries carried, the fire protection features of each model of aircraft in their fleet, the expected flight profile, flight duration, ETOPS, the history of the battery shipper's compliance to the dangerous goods transport regulations, the quantity of batteries per flight, location of batteries within the cargo compartment, proximity to other dangerous goods, potential ignition sources in the compartment and other relevant aspects of the operator's cargo carriage experience. I know I have a couple of questions, but I think I've taken up a lot of time. So shall I hand it over?
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end. So great job. Thank you very much. And if you'll pass the remote to Scott. First Officer Scott Reeves, Manager Flight Safety, FedEx Express.
So many of you know me from a past life of doing aviation safety work at ALPA and the company for over a decade, carrying passengers. And just a little under 5 years ago, I went to FedEx, thinking, hey, I'm a safety geek. I get this safety stuff, and we take the passengers out of the picture. It's got to be easier. Turns out there are some issues that I was unaware of in the cargo world. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. Routinely, we operate to non-towered ops. Now, as a RJ driver and as a turboprop driver, I went to some non-towered fields, but very, very few people are taking a 757 into a non-towered field. The first time I went to Lafayette, Louisiana, and polished off my private pilot Lafayette area traffic. FedEx 1248 is a Boeing 757 on a 5-mile downwind. Other traffic, please advise. And that's an every night occurrence for us. So you've got a list here of cities where we operate to every single night with no tower operating. So, and many of those, for instance, Lafayette has no approach facility except for the Houston Center. So you get much less effective vectors. You have less help trying to find the airport, and there's not an immediate press one button and call the ARF boys. Interestingly enough, you can see there's actually a larger list of cities where we operate wide bodies to a non-towered operation city. So we do have an infrastructure difference in the way we operate. Some of these cities, I don't want to throw stones at any one of them, but there's one of those cities on that list, two of them actually, specifically schedules their tower operators to come to work 5 minutes after we depart. And they go home while we're on final approach every night like clockwork. And so it does, add some level of risk at least to the way we operate, just because of the lack of facilities that we operate into. We have, before I got to FedEx, we learned a few lessons about CFIT risk, and it turns out that CFIT risk doesn't only mean there's rocks. And Tallahassee is not a place you would think of as a CFIT risk airport, but it is the place where FedEx had a hull loss accident due to a CFIT accident. So we analyze every city we operate into. As part of the process to start a new city, my department, the Flight Safety Office, is tasked with, hey, we're going to go to city XYZ. And one of our people will look at that city, and we analyze the terrain, whether or not there's precision approaches available, or what the probability is that we're going to do a non-precision approach. We look for PAPIs and VASIs, black hole approaches, what radar coverage is available, what ATC coverage is available, and we even look at is English the language of the controllers, as far as adding confusion to the operation. And when we analyze those, we come out, and it turns out we have 132 cities with a high CFIT risk. 28 of them are routine destinations, and you can see that 2 of those are also non-towered ops. So every night we go in with, in those cases, wide body and narrow body and 7.5s into airports day in and day out, non-towered ops, and have some of those risks. Now, some of those airports that are on our list have an ILS available. Birmingham's an example, and the preference would be obviously to operate on an ILS if it's available. We've determined 124 further cities have what we call a moderate CFIT risk, and we have a scoring mechanism. We score all of these factors I talked about. And you can see there's a list of 8 cities that are non-towered ops, and every night, 5 nights a week, we go in there, and many of those with wide bodies, and all the rest with 7.5s. So there's an infrastructure difference in how we operate that you might not operate. I don't know for sure, but talking to some of my compadres at other carriers in the A4A business, I don't believe you're taking wide bodies on a regular basis into high CFIT risk airports with no tower operations. So there is a little bit deal. The other thing, the first thing I learned at FedEx about operations was I was used to taxiing RJs, fairly small airplane, on really big ramps like Houston. At FedEx, we kind of do it the other way around. My first experience was I was trained on the Airbus, and before I went to the line, I did some Part 91 flying with an Airbus. So that means you take an A300 and put it on a really small ramp, and it adds complexity. Some of that we do on a day in and day out basis. You can see South Bend, Indiana, we operate into, and it is one of the cities it's a fairly recent new city to us, but it's one we go into every night, 5 nights a week, and there is one route available to get to our ramp. All of the other taxiways are restricted to airplanes that are lighter or have smaller wingspan than we have. It's not the only one in that list. Huntington, West Virginia, for many years, the airport at Huntington, taxiway Golf, was restricted to aircraft with a wingspan 1 foot wider than a 727. When we started parking 727s, they got excited about losing their service. So they used a little bit of concrete and some paint to steer around the ILS antenna, and now it's restricted to airplanes with a wingspan about 1 foot wider than a 757, which we take in there every night, actually twice a day inbound and twice a day outbound. So the airport, obviously, its normal operations is business jets, turboprops, and, oh yeah, a 757 carrying cargo. Lafayette, Louisiana is another example. Many, many, many times in there with an RJ or a turboprop, and there was this one taxiway that I thought, you know, I better pay attention to that while taxiing because it's kind of narrow. Well, it's really narrow with a 757. And it turns out there's only one way into the ramp. You must use runway 11 as a taxiway to get into our ramp. Every other taxiway on the airport is restricted to weights lower than or wingspan shorter than a 757. So yeah, that's on the list of non-towered ops. So not only do I have to come in, we land on 22 left or 4 right. It's a well-served runway. They generally leave the flashers on and the ILS on for the 4s, and so that gives us an opportunity, assuming the wind works that way, to get in with good lighting. But we then have to back taxi and turn onto a runway while talking to any local traffic. Fortunately, there's not a lot of GA traffic at 6 a.m., but there are a few helicopters heading out toward the Gulf Coast. So that is another example of our facility airports. And then the final thing that I found sort of after we got involved in this is airport construction. Everybody builds airport. Everybody has to have construction. But it turns out that they really like to do their construction at night because there's fewer operations. And the classic example is Birmingham that Robert's very well aware with. And Birmingham had available a large runway with an ILS and needed to do maintenance on it, and they shut it down at night to do maintenance so that they could be open during the day when 15 or 20 or 30, I can't remember how many, RJs were going to operate. But the wide-body Airbus 300 and the 757 that operated there every night were going to be required to land on a shorter runway because the long runway with the ILS available was not available for during our times of arrivals. One advantage we had, our captain of the flight of the night of the accident was, he lived in Birmingham. He understood what was going on, operated there regularly. He called his dispatcher and said, we're not going at Mach 8, we're going at 7.6. Here's why. I'm not going to get there till the tower opens. And in fact, he did. They slowed down, they got there and came in, were required to hold for a few minutes while they sorted out what was going on. But they were far enough behind that their plan was, and the runway had already, was coming open in time for them to get there. Last week, I went to Birmingham in the morning. That runway with the ILS is closed every night. However, this year, their maintenance plan starts their maintenance after the UPS flight leaves, and it ends before the UPS flight arrives. They open the runway 10 minutes before our scheduled arrival and 5 minutes before UPS's scheduled arrival. So it can be done. We can figure these things out and work around these issues. And Birmingham's not the only airport that way. Our home drome in Memphis does maintenance at night. However, they kind of do it at a strange part of the night to work around our nighttime arrivals. So.
Great job, Scott. Thank you very much. Robert, you're up.
Great. Thanks to be. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Well, let's see. So when you think about it, I guess next week ALPA will celebrate its 84th anniversary on July the 26th, I think it is. And when you think about it, ALPA's roots are with flying cargo. We may not have referred to it as flying cargo, but it looked something like this. It was airmail. And over the years, I've collected airmail that was involved in accidents from the 1920s and the 1930s. Some of these are framed in my office. Here's one from 1928, nice and burned. And here's one that says, if you read the stamp on it, the green stamp, mail delayed by accident in Mendota, Minnesota, in which pilot Elmer Lee Partridge was killed. This was 1926. And, you know, over half of ALPA's founding fathers later went on to perish in airplane crashes. And that's a pretty significant number there. So ALPA has had a long-standing interest in safety and especially cargo safety. And likewise, just as the ALPA has had a long-standing interest in cargo safety, the NTSB's roots are with investigating cargo plane accidents in some form or fashion, including current times, as Scott just mentioned. Since I've been on the board for 9 years, I've personally been involved in some form or fashion as a board member of investigating 5 cargo plane accidents. And I'm going to talk about briefly 3 of them. One of which the board just held a board meeting on last Tuesday, the National Airline 747 in Bagram. This investigation was originally being conducted by the Afghani government, with the U.S. being an accredited representative to it. The Afghan government ended up just ceding the investigation and letting the NTSB complete it. So we held our board meeting on it last week. You may not recognize it by that name, but and I won't show the video, but I think we'll all remember seeing this video very vividly on TV or on YouTube, to see a 747 climbing out very steeply, almost stopping in the air and then plunging to the ground. So what did we all think? None of us speculate on aircraft accidents, of course, but what did we think that might have involved? Any thoughts? Cargo shift.
Yep.
And you'd be exactly right. The airplane was carrying 5 of these funny-looking things, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles. They were carrying 5 of those. And actually we found, our investigators found on the runway debris from the aft pressure bulkhead, some of the hydraulic piping from the airplane, and even the part of an antenna from the aftmost one of these vehicles, as well as a nice impression in on the aft pressure bulkhead liner that was in the shape of the rear tire, the spare tire, that even they could read the word Michelin on. So the investigators were pretty certain that there had indeed been a cargo shift. It took out some of the hydraulic systems as well. So in going back, they reconstructed that these vehicles were strapped down with, for each of the MAT-Vs, strapped down with 24 straps, and for the Cougar, 26 straps. Is that enough? Well, by National Airlines' own cargo manual, the MAT-V should have had 32 straps. The Cougar should have had 44 for the front Cougar and 46 for the aft Cougar. But Boeing went and computed it and said, you know what? They shouldn't have been carrying 5 of those vehicles anyway. The most that they should have carried would have been 1 MAT-V, 1, and it should have had 60 straps on it. So there were some real issues here. The company was not even following its own guidelines, and those guidelines were not even in accordance with the aircraft manufacturer's guidelines. The probable cause, of course, causation is always a very complex issue, but basically National Airlines' inadequate procedures for restraining special cargo loads, which resulted in the loadmaster's improper restraint of the cargo, which moved aft and damaged the hydraulic systems number 1 and 2, and the hydraulic stabilizer drive mechanisms, rendering the airplane uncontrollable. I feel, in contributing to it, we felt that the FAA's oversight over National Airlines with respect to handling loads like this was not sufficient. I believe our most important product of an accident investigation is, in fact, the recommendations. That's what we're in the business to do, find out what happened so that we can keep it from happening again. And one of the recommendations is that there should be a certification for loadmasters, which would encompass things like procedures, training, duty hour limitations, rest requirements. This loadmaster would have been on duty for over 24 hours had the flight been completed. Now, granted, the loadmaster can sleep while the pilots are flying, but nevertheless, we found that we feel that there needs to be certification, which encompasses training, and also we feel that there should be greater FAA oversight when dealing with special cargo loads. So that's the National Airlines accident. Another one that Doug mentioned was the UPS DC-8 in Philadelphia that occurred in 2006. We were not able to determine precisely the origin of the fire, but we figured that the physical evidence indicated that it was in one of 3 of the cargo containers. I think containers either 12, 13, or 14, which happened to be where the most damage was, and that was also the location of containers that were carrying a large number of laptops and cell phones. So there again, the issue, lithium batteries. One of the findings from the report, this should not be a surprise to anyone here, especially after hearing Doug talk, but flight crews on cargo-only aircraft remain at risk from in-flight fires involving both primary and secondary lithium batteries. A number of recommendations from this report, but highlighting those would be better procedures for flight crews dealing with in-flight fires. Require fire suppression systems in the cargo compartment for all cargo airplanes operating under 121, and improved ARF response for cargo airplanes. UPS, Scott mentioned this 2 years ago, 2 fatalities unfortunately. This was basically a CFIT accident. I remember talking to a reporter while I was down on the site, and she said, "It's Birmingham. What's there to hit?" And I said, "The ground." And unfortunately, that's what happened here. Again, accident causation is very complex, and we found a number of factors related to the causation. But contributing to the accident, there were 6 contributing factors, according to the board, 2 of which related to fatigue, the captain's fatigue and the first officer's fatigue. Fatigue, we're very concerned about. It's been on our most wanted list. We issued 20 recommendations, not of course all related to fatigue, but 20 recommendations, 2 to the Independent Pilots Association, 2 to UPS, and really what those recommendations were the company and the union need to work together on fatigue reporting to ensure the system is effective and non-punitive. At the public hearing for that accident, we had a union rep and a company rep, and you would have thought that they worked for totally different companies based on their testimony on how effective their fatigue reporting system was working. So we felt that they needed to work better in that respect. Now, a lot of people said, there were people that said, well, the NTSB needs to take a position on the Part 117 exclusion, of course, the exclusion for cargo carriers. Well, this is a letter that we wrote to the FAA in 2013, and basically, I want you to know that the NTSB disagrees with the cargo carrier exclusion. We don't support that. We've gone on record saying that we do not support it, and the letter says, as many fatigue-related accidents that we've investigated over the years involved cargo carriers. We also believe that because of the time of day that the cargo operators typically occur, such operators are in greater need of these requirements, and we are very concerned about the cargo exclusion. So that's our position. Now, people said, there were people that were coming to the NTSB saying, well, this needs to be, the UPS accident at Birmingham needs to be the poster child for why the cargo cutout, the 117 exclusion for cargo carriers, why that's a bad thing. There was only one problem. The schedule that those pilots were flying was far more conservative than Part 117. And so one of the findings was the schedule that the flight crew was flying would have been in compliance with Part 117 had those requirements been in effect. Of course, it didn't go into effect until about 4 months after the accident, and had it applied to all cargo carriers. So to make an argument saying that this should have been part of the investigation when the facts don't support that argument is a great way to lose credibility. So we did not try and make this a 117 exclusion accident because, again, the facts didn't support it. To give you an idea, Part 117 would require a maximum duty time of 11 hours. These pilots were scheduled for 8 hours and 11 minutes. Their maximum flight time under Part 117 would be 8 hours. These pilots were scheduled to fly 2.5 hours. Minimum night's rest under Part 117, 10 hours. These pilots were scheduled to fly, had 14 hours and 30 minutes, 14 hours and 28 minutes of scheduled rest. Part 117 would require a maximum of 5 consecutive nights. These pilots had flown for 2 nights. So again, we don't like the 117 exclusion. We don't feel that it's good for safety, but the facts surrounding this accident did not support that. In summary, the NTSB remains keenly interested in cargo safety, and my personal opinion is the only acceptable level of safety is 1 level of safety. So thank you very much.
Scott. Thank you, Robert. Very, very informative. Thank you. Chuck, over to you to close the panel.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Rich, and good morning again. You know, I want to piggyback on what Robert just said. You know, one of my famous quotes from the 15th century author John Donne is, "I don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." And when we're looking at safety and studying accidents and safety processes, you know, it really gets to the point to where I don't think about whether it's cargo or passenger. It's all the same. And I think certainly in the cargo realm, there's two very powerful notions that, you know, I think breed cynicism. The number, you know, from the general public standpoint, cargo just doesn't add up to the passenger, to the passengers. The general public doesn't view cargo accidents as really being noteworthy. We'll spend lots of time covering passenger accidents, and we'll obviously identify cargo accidents, but 2 nights later we're watching reruns of Everyone Loves Raymond. We've forgotten about it. And I'm often wondered, you know, suppose Birmingham UPS 1354. Suppose that wasn't at Birmingham, but it was going into Los Angeles or into San Diego, and that aircraft hit the ground. Would we be asking ourselves or doing things differently in the cargo realm than we are today? The same with UPS 6. Doug alluded to that in his remarks. Had that airplane not been trying to make its way back into Dubai, but was making its approach to Los Angeles or Miami, would we be changing? Would the public's awareness change? And then the other notion is that, you know, it really takes an accident for things to get done. And I know many of you in the audience, and certainly this panel would agree, we can't wait for accidents to get things done. We got to take a proactive look towards any safety issue, whether it be passenger or cargo. I think you've heard some of the unique challenges that are in front of cargo. Certainly lithium batteries is a hot topic, no pun intended. It is certainly cause for focus, and we're now starting to see some changes finally, and I think there's some glimmer of hope in identifying the risks with those, certainly in the passenger realm, but we're moving a little bit slower in the cargo realm. You know, I thought I was interested in Scott's remarks about some of the other issues that face cargo pilots. You know, we all know about the hours of operations, but the resources that are changed or altered when they operate into some of those airports late at night. So I think, you know, from my perspective, I think how we work all of these issues, you know, even if we do solve lithium batteries, that's not the only issue that's in play with our cargo counterparts. Captain Terry McVenis, predecessor of mine, who is now with Boeing, and you'll have the opportunity to hear from him this afternoon, stated many years ago, and I think it's an important point. A core fundamental business practice of any company must be a well-defined corporate safety culture. All these problems, all these challenges, I think, rely on the organization to be proactive. As you heard Scott describe some of the challenges in the taxiway closures going into some of his airports, I think that's the kind of forensic analysis that you have to have. You have to identify these things before they really rear their ugly head. And I think, you know, the approach, I think, for all air safety is that, you know, we're trying to be very, very proactive. You know, unfortunately, accidents, for the tragedies that they cause, the loss of our colleagues, crew members, and the impact to their families, you know, there's another victim in a crash, and that's our ability to get safety work done sometimes. Sometimes because the regulator feels rushed into putting in regulations that later on we may find out really didn't address that issue. The rush to assign accountability, and certainly to perform litigation. All of those detract from trying to get to root causes. You know, and Robert certainly can identify with this, you know, I think as corporations and certainly the cargo carriers move forward, I think they ought to consider taking an approach that we do in the cockpit, and that's called crew resource management and threat and error management. is be proactive in trying to identify risks. You know, the risks that we have, and you've heard about them here this morning on the panel. Flight time, duty time, that's a risk. A couple of years ago, a couple of my colleagues, Captain Dave Wells and Captain Mike Bender of FedEx, wrote a paper on aging aircraft, as aging aircraft are still used in many of the cargo operations. Those aircraft need tender, loving care in their maintenance. And you know, there is a good business plan for operating those aircraft. They don't have to worry about redesigning the overhead bins for roller boards, and you know, cargo doesn't seem to complain about the fact there's no Wi-Fi on the airplane. So there's a good cause for these airplanes to be used, but we have to look at how those airplanes are maintained and how they're used. And one thing, you know, we also have to look at is security. You know, we spend a lot of time in the passenger world looking at security, but are we as equally cognizant of the threats of those that would do us harm at the remote areas that our cargo operators operate from? You know, 15 years ago, we didn't hear a lot about lithium batteries. Well, I guarantee you, just about every one of you out there has a lithium battery within arm's reach. And we've now identified the risks, and we've seen some of the hazards with carrying those. And as Doug mentioned, and you know, I think Scott alluded to it too, the good news is I think as an industry, I think we are taking a very, very good approach through the work of the Commercial Air Safety Team and the fuel for the Commercial Air Safety Team, which is the ASIAS, in allowing us to collect voluntary reporting both from the aircraft and from the flight crews in the form of ASAP and FOQA. And I think that will help us not only to identify the risks and the specific risks in the cargo industry, but I think it will also allow us to develop those mitigations. You know, I can't help but to go back to former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who once said, "We know we don't know what we don't know." And listening to Robert describe the National Air Cargo crash over in Afghanistan, if we had only known that there were some risks about the restraint system, and if we had a loadmaster who was participating in a voluntary safety program, or a series of loadmasters that could have said, you know, we're getting these big vehicles from the military. Have we checked with the aircraft manufacturer to ensure that we're really supposed to be taking them or restraining them in that way? And I'm hopeful that as certainly voluntary reporting from flight crews and certainly from our cargo colleagues improves, and we provide the environment for them to report things and notions that don't look right, that maybe we can prevent rather than react. Thank you.
All right, excellent words, Chuck. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our panel a round of applause.